Good to be here. Always good to be here. I'm currently in Ireland and I'm recording an introduction to my latest art chat, which is with a friend of mine, Zoe Aiano. I met Zoe in Cluj in Romania a few years ago at an international film festival. I think she was there as a member of the press, and but a while later, after I first met her, she started making films of her own. And on this chat, she shares some info on her latest project. But we also talk about other things, including Brexit and sex. One of those topics is more fun to talk about than the other one. Can you guess which one? Enjoy.
Hello.
Hello, Zoe.
Hi.
This is fun. Thank you for doing this.
Well, thanks for the invitation.
I know that you just come back from Paris.
Well, actually
What were
from
you doing
Marseille.
there? Oh, right, Marseille. What were you doing? What were you doing around those parts? Part of the world.
Mostly regretting my life choices that I don't live by the Mediterranean all the time. Um,
Oh,
no, I was there. We have this feature documentary in development, and we're part of a development kind of working group that's taking place in Marseille because my co-director is doing her PhD there, so it's connected to her PhD basically. So I was there to meet some other people working on their films and exchange ideas and have some kind of a therapy group, it felt like to me.
did it?
Yeah, but in a good way, you know? It's like you have all this stuff on your mind and you want to get it out, but you don't want to bore people with it. And then you're in a place where the whole point is to do exactly that. So it's kind of cool.
Were you there with a specific project of your own?
Yeah, so it's this project. I mean, we've been working on it for, I think it's coming up to 5 years now, which is a bit insane. And it feels like we're still only at the beginning, which is even more insane. But yeah, it's this feature documentary that we've been working on in Eastern Serbia.
Yeah, it sounds perfectly normal to me. 5 years. In fact, it's the title of a Bowie song too.
There you go. I think with it,
Which one is this, by the way? Which documentary is this one?
so this is the documentary about this town in Eastern Serbia, which has the dual identity of being a mining town, but also home to an ethnicity connected to esoteric and mystic practices. So it's about the kind of fight between the two souls of the place. And we're following this family who are both miners and dragon hunters. So that's the kind of nutshell of it.
Are you interested in the esoteric?
Yeah, I am. I don't know that I was, or I guess I always was, but didn't know that much about it. And then increasingly working on this project, then yeah, I wouldn't say I'm not like an esoteric practitioner myself, but
Yeah.
I do find it interesting. There's something kind of compelling about it.
Is there something specific that you like about the esoteric?
Um, I think I'm always drawn to the weird and fantastical generally. I mean, what actually originally brought us to this region is we were interested, it's known for its witches. So,
Mm.
so actually our first idea until we met the dragon hunters and then changed all of our plans. We wanted to do a project based on the role of the witches as kind of feminist figures and the female role of being a witch within the community. And I think there's this kind of continuing movement to sort of reclaim the idea of witchiness and put it to feminist ends, and I find that super interesting.
Me too. I find all of that stuff super interesting. My grandmother from my mother's side, she was really into this stuff. She used to go to all of these different conventions about any aspect of the esoteric, and we're talking about. I don't think dragons, more like on the other side of life type of thing, like ghosts
Uh, uh,
communicating with ghosts and rituals too. That was a big part of it. But also, she was kind of challenging. Like she wanted to go to these places to see if any of it was real at all, and she did have a lot of fun. On the other hand, though, I remember her taking it very seriously. I think there's a lot of there's a serious side to all of this stuff too.
There
Very
is,
serious.
there is, but it's also true that there is a fun side to it somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like
Yeah,
hunting
it's
dragons.
yeah.
Are they actually looking for dragons then?
Well, so kind of the central metaphor of the whole film is basically that the dragons aren't there to hunt anymore because the dragons live in the forest. But
Of course.
the situation is such that the mine is ever expanding and kind of just destroying the whole area. So it's causing a lot of deforestation and also pollution, and it's also driving the people away because the working conditions are so bad. So that's kind of the metaphor that we're following, is that the dragons are leaving. Even the dragons are leaving. That's how bad stuff is. So the guys that we're following, they can't do it anymore because the dragons aren't there, which leaves us something of a problem in terms of filming it. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, they do think of them as dragons the way that everyone else thinks of them as dragons. And when we ask them, like, what do they look like? They're like, looks like a dragon. Stop asking stupid questions. So
Right. Hey, so how often have you been to this mining town?
well, there was a bit of a gap in between when I was working on this other project. Basically, the
Yeah.
the kind of whole story of it is that we originally just intended to make a short film, and then we got kind of suckered in and realized all the things that we wanted to say wouldn't fit. So we realized we needed a long feature film, and then it took us a while to figure out what to do about that. So I don't know, yeah, like a couple of times a year for the past 5 years, and now we finally have funding. So
Yeah.
now I can go as often as I like.
And you speak the language, so it that helps obviously.
Well, I learned the language for the film. I mean, it's not like I'm super fluent or anything, but I can get by.
You learned the language for the film, specifically for the film.
Well, I mean, I honestly, I always wanted to speak this language anyway. I like it a lot. The language in
Yeah.
question being Serbo-Croat, I should say. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, none of the people that we're filming speak any English, so it was kind of out of necessity, really. And also just, yeah, because I've been editing the materials, and then I kind of had to, I don't know, somehow just learn it so I could edit.
Yeah, but I love the way that you can just do that, learn another language. For me, that would be the superpower that I'd like to have when people ask me, if you could have a superpower, what could it be? I just say I'd love to be able to speak any language in the world ever. Possibly even talk with animals. I'd love to be able to do that too. But that's pretty amazing. So how many languages do you speak
Oh, I don't
actually?
know. I hate this question because the thing is,
Hmm.
I speak a lot of languages, but I speak them all half-assed. I don't, there's not really any language that I speak that well. My Italian used to be decent, and now I'm not super happy with it anymore because I don't really speak it anymore. So I can get,
I feel like I feel like you'd have a high, you'd be very critical of yourself just because, you half know so many, as you say. I mean, I feel like you actually do know them. It's just that you're being too tough on yourself.
well, I don't know, but it's also, being a native English speaker and being surrounded by people who speak my own language almost as well as I do, plus their language. I feel like even though everyone thinks that being a native English speaker is an advantage, and of course it is in so many ways. But on the other hand, I also feel a bit cheated because it's like everyone else has their language plus mine.
I wasn't born obviously in an English speaking country, but I spent the vast majority of my life in an English speaking country. But still, every now and again, I've noticed that I do something that really annoys me. Instead of saying whom or who, I say that.
Right.
It's just a little thing that whenever I hear it, I'm like, oh, why didn't you say whom? And it drives me crazy.
But we all have
Just
stuff like that, though.
yeah. And speaking of English speaking countries, Brexit.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Are you said that you were in mourning because of Brexit. How do you feel now about it?
Well, the thing is, I think that it's just dragged on so long. I guess
I know.
so now that it finally, when it finally happened, it almost, I didn't even really pay any attention to it. I was a little bit worried that there would be some logistical problem that I would end up stuck in a country somewhere. But it's all quite undramatic in the end.
If you were to like explain Brexit from your own perspective to someone who has no idea what Brexit is, how would you sort of go about doing that?
Well, so the people of the
In your own words, and just be as, just say whatever you'd like.
I mean, to me, it's the people of the UK just basically shooting themselves in the foot massively, because of a bunch of asshole politicians who, from their own vested interests, basically manipulated a bunch of people into lying about what the problems behind the country are, and pretty much screwing everyone over for the foreseeable future. That's how I see it, pretty much.
I can't believe that there's been this narrative going on. I don't think it's exclusive to the UK, by the
No,
way. I feel
unfortunately.
like this is a narrative. I don't know why this is happening, and maybe it's also because the European Union hasn't been the best at communicating what it has done for the countries that were member states, so to speak. And I feel like the press is much more responsible than maybe even the press itself likes to think, because they've been carrying on this narrative. I think it's just because it's easy to speak in this way.
It is easy, but it's also the vested interest of the press, right? I mean, you look at the people, especially the UK is like a classic example. I mean, also then you look at Italy, which had Berlusconi for years, and there's various countries where there are far too many links between the people in power and the people who have control over the media. And in the UK, I mean, it's like it's terrible, and it's not really surprising that it ends up so manipulative, because it's just really terrible people who are in charge of the press for the most part.
You travel quite a bit, like myself, and it's kind of sad the way that people are closing themselves off. I mean, they seem to be locking themselves up in their own countries again. I personally know that I don't even know where I'm from, because I've got I don't even have an Irish passport, but I grew up here.
Right.
And it would cost me a lot of money to get an Irish passport. But I just feel like that people seem to be more content in their own countries, and it's kind of also maybe a little bit of fear sets in that way, of being afraid of just going to a neighboring country is just a big step for anybody.
I mean, I think going back to Brexit, I think part of the problem is that, when you look at the demographics of who voted what, then there was this, it was older people, especially who voted for it, right? And older people who were behind a lot of this turn to the right generally. But, because I can say, without wanting to sound like, that I'm super in love with the EU, but I really owe, like, all of my adult life, I owe to the opportunities I've had through being able to turn up in other countries, and through EU programs, and through freedom of movement, and through like this openness, and knowing that I had this, it's like entirely shaped who I am. And I can understand people who are older that didn't have these opportunities. They don't get it, and they don't know what they're losing. But then it made me really heartbroken around the time of the election, when they were interviewing people about why they voted for Brexit, and they would say things like, "Oh, I did it for the future of my grandkids," and you just think, "Oh no, but you have no idea what you've just taken away from your grandkids, actually." Yeah.
Hey, but are you afraid to like wake up one morning and realize, hey, I now support the right wing parties?
No. Honestly,
I'm
no.
kind of worried about that.
Really?
It seems like the older you get, the more intolerant you become, and I don't want to be. Aren't you worried though that one day maybe you'll just be full of hate for your neighbor, and just just become totally intolerant, therefore the right. I mean, the right wing is kind of built upon those ideals.
Yeah.
Just like look after ourselves, forget about everyone else. You're not worried about that?
I mean, maybe I ought to be. It's definitely true if I look back. My most radical years was like, my 15-year-old, 16-year-old self. That was when, but that was also because at that point you're kind of fired up, but you're that detached from reality that you think everything is really easy to fix. And then you get a bit older and you're like, oh, it's more complicated than I thought.
Why would you say they were your radical years?
Oh,
What
I
did you
mean,
do?
like I didn't do anything. I watched a bunch of movies,
right.
but on the level of discourse, at least. I mean, so I did the same thing I do now, honestly. But my ideas when I was sort of 15, 16, then I was worried about the same things. But everything was so clear in my mind. Everything was very like black and white. And now I don't quite see it that way. But in terms of going fully to the right, I hope that the values that the leftist values that they have, I hope that they're ingrained in me strong enough that that's not gonna be an issue. And I have to say, I'm quite proud of my parents, who are both, they're both in their 60s, and they're both still like, my mum is even more leftist than I am, I think. And
Right.
so yeah, I think based on family patterns, I shouldn't have to be too worried. But I don't know. But then kids do go against their parents, so maybe I'm going to go the other way, and I'm going to be the one who turns fascist in my old age. God, I hope not.
It's possible, though. It is a fear. Something could happen to trigger that, but hopefully the world will end before then. You ever think about the end of the world?
Or like at the moment, honestly, all the freaking time.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, what do you mean by that? In what sense do you think about it? Is it a very graphic and visual thought, or a very kind of psychological thought?
I suppose more psychological. I think at this point with all of this crazy stuff going on politically, but also with the fires that keep breaking out, and don't you just have this really apocalyptic feeling right now? I don't know. It's I just feel that there's a very kind of weird atmosphere in the world at the moment, and I keep having discussions with people about it, and the recurring theme is that it's almost like everyone's taking the end of humanity as given. The question is if we'll live to see it or not, which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. But just that we
sometimes I think it's a good thing.
Well, exactly. But I think it's, the main question is now, like, we just have to hope that we don't take the rest of the planet down with us. It's like our fate seems more or less sealed at this point. But
yes, I feel like the end of the world could be very near, and I feel like our generation is very much tied to the future of the planet, and I somehow feel like it's too late.
Which is what makes me sad. It's like, I think I'm more and more
sad,
for the planet than I do because we're the ones who are responsible for all of it.
I can't. Yeah, but I don't know what to do about it.
No,
I don't know what to
neither.
do. I studied art.
I know.
What can I do? I can't do anything. And I think it's in a very selfish way. I would rather we all died together. But
yeah, I think
true.
I have a feeling of like, oh, just get on with it then.
What do you think? Because I could ask you what you think happens after death, but maybe we don't want to go down that route.
I mean, I would love it if it was something, but I always assumed that death was just, oblivion.
Right. What do you do to like distract yourself from these thoughts of the end of the world and Brexit? What's the other thing that's occupying your life at the moment? Oh, yeah, and your filmmaking.
Yeah.
You got a lot going on, Zoe.
I do have a lot going on. It's annoying, right? It's
No, it's not annoying. This is what I do. This is what I constantly have to do something. I think it's a type of an addiction.
Yeah, it is a little bit, but for sure. But but it's frustrating that actually I would love to just get on with work and projects and life stuff, and then you just get sucked into this black hole of misery over. I mean, the UK elections in December, that was just like, that really floored me. That was so much harsher than I expected.
Hey, do you find sometimes given the fact that you're so busy, and I can totally relate to that, that the rest of the world seems to move at a different pace.
I don't know, but maybe I'm also just surrounded by people who are also kind of frantic.
That is a good
I've
point.
never really
And
noticed it,
yeah,
I have to say. Or maybe I'm just like
yeah.
lost in my own chaos and don't have much of a perception of other people's rhythms.
Yeah. What about this research that you've been doing that you told me about?
Well, so my hopefully next project, although I'm not sure how much sense it makes to be starting a new project until I've finished this one, is about this time last year I became really obsessed with this book from the 70s called My Secret Garden by Nancy Friday. And it's basically what she did is she interviewed a bunch of women, or didn't just interview them, also they would leave her voice messages, or they would write into her. She kind of put notices in newspapers, and she just collected this anthology basically of women's sexual fantasies. And I found it really interesting, and I don't really know of any kind of comparable work, and I don't know of any other kind of. I'm really interested. I mean, I'm interested in sex in general. Who isn't? But I'm interested, especially in kind of the imagination and fantasy. That's sort of a recurring theme through my work. So I don't know, just still a year down the line, I'm still fixated with this book and decided that I wanted to do something with it. So my rough idea is that I would kind of take the ideas but apply them to on a visual level and kind of use it as an excuse to like play around with visual language and try and create some kind of aesthetics of erotica, but from a female perspective.
What do you mean by female perspective?
Well, I think
We're speaking in binary terms, I
yeah.
suppose.
Well,
You know,
so
in this
that's
case,
actually,
but
I mean, that's one of the directions that I kind of want to go with in the project, is that my big utopian dream for it is that actually it would just be the start of a much bigger thing, that then I would kind of like do my little bit at the beginning and then pass it on to other primarily women or non-binary people or trans people to kind of continue it, because I think, yeah, it's more definitely the dominant language of porn, and I mean, I don't relate to porn, I don't relate to sitcoms or like rom-coms or whatever. um and I think there's like a lot more space for creating something that's more nuanced, but I think it should also reflect the ideas of a lot of people. I don't want to try and create one definitive language. I want to kind of open up the space, I suppose.
how did you find out about this book? I've never heard about. No, I mean, I think I've heard about it before actually, but it sounds really interesting.
I can't really remember. I must have read, I don't know if it's because she died. That's kind of bad, but there was some sort of review of it, and like a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh wow, that sounds really interesting. And then I found, like, tracked it down and yeah, and read
Yeah.
it. I mean, it is very problematic in a lot of ways. It's kind of interesting as well, especially the fact that it's the 70s and it's such an interesting time for feminist discourse and politics in general. But she herself wasn't really aligned with any of the feminist movements that were taking place there. So as a text, it's a bit awkward in the present day. It's not very politically correct. There's a lot of it's not very scientific. On the other hand, it's also not especially literary either, but yeah, I mean, it's just such a kind of fascinating body of work. And so one of the things that I would like to do is also take the time to see if I can kind of dig in and find other stuff from other periods. I don't think that I mean, as far as I know, there's no other comparable like research that's been done except for people who've later emulated what she did. But I would be interested to kind of like dive into archives and maybe try and find like personal correspondence or stories or anything that to try and reconstruct it.
I wish I could tell you the name. Well, so I read a book on a similar theme about the futurists and how they viewed sex and eroticism. There was a very prominent female author who wrote about this extensively, and she was known for experimenting with sex a lot, doing all sorts of crazy things, but I can't think of her name right now. Anyways, it was a really fascinating and crazy book, and they're really, really honest about sexuality, and it's really great to read about sex in this way, because when you think about it, all this stuff was written in the 20s and the 30s. When the fascists came along, futurism changed. I feel like futurism actually stopped existing when it had to sort of be financed by the fascist party, because otherwise they would have all been in jail. But the earliest one, yeah, the way in which they talked about sex was incredible, especially for the times. So that's something for your research if you ever
No, I definitely want to check it out
continue.
for sure. I mean, I think it's interesting. Also, one of the things that it's not directly related, but a while back I was really surprised. I finally read the Decameron for the first time a couple of years
Oh
ago,
wow,
and
I love the Decameron.
but I was really surprised,
You
because
did? Did you read it in Italian or English?
I read it in English.
It's the same. I was just curious, just
Um,
because we talked
but
about languages
well,
earlier. But
I
yeah.
read it's funny, I read it in English. I got some PDF from the internet. But my favorite story, by chance, that one, I don't know why, like that one had been left in Italian, and it was like it was done just for me that yeah, that then I could read that one in the original language. But yeah, I was really surprised, because you always have this idea that uh, female sexuality was discovered in the 60s or whatever, that like before that people
Yeah.
didn't realize. But then I was so fascinated reading Boccaccio that I mean, so many of the stories are about actually the fact that if you don't get a woman married off soon enough, then she's got all this insane sexual energy that causes all the problems. That's like the basis of like such a huge number of the stories. Like it's like the venting of women's sexual frustration. But yet still at the same time, women don't have control over it. And it's like there's this acknowledgement that women have sexual needs, but there's also it's still being controlled by like their fathers and brothers, and it was like super fascinating to me, the whole thing of it.
Exactly. And actually the futurists also said the similar thing, but actually what they said was, yes, they should, this energy should be unleashed into the world. So it's pretty, but they were really into like just destruction being a good thing and all of that stuff. Very controversial things, crazy. But why do you find sex such an interesting topic?
I don't know, that's a good question, and one I probably should have thought about in advance. I don't know, it's I'm especially interested in feminism and things related to women and female stories, and I think sexuality was one of these big things that taking control of the way you describe and experience your own sexuality is such a big thing, and I guess it's also such an ongoing thing now. And I'm also really interested in archetypes and yeah, and the stories that we tell and why we tell them, and um, like who gets power from these stories and what they're useful for. And I don't know, I guess sex just I think I also like to provoke, honestly, there's a childish part of me that, sex is always going to be taboo, and it's always going to get a rise out of people, as it were. Um, so yeah, I don't know, but it's also I feel like it's a rabbit hole I've kind of fallen into gradually, because yeah, the last project I was working on was this one about a woman who supposedly seduced Nazis to give them syphilis. And
Oh yeah, yeah, you told me about that.
yeah,
Let's
and
let's document it. Tell me about that story. That's fascinating.
well, so the basis of the project is this urban legend about this Czechoslovak nurse who had to tend the Nazi soldiers who were occupying her town in the local hospital, and then she supposedly got raped and was given syphilis. So as her means of rebellion or resistance, or however you want to phrase it, then she decided to seduce as many of them as possible to give them back the syphilis. So it's kind of an interesting story in itself, but what interested me about it was the fact that it's actually constructed. And I wanted to take apart the different elements of the story and kind of point out that a story like this can be kind of believable because it fits into the very limited sphere of stories that we have about women, and especially women in wartime, and this idea that the woman's only weapon is her body, and this whole like very tired rape revenge motif and stuff like this. So that was really all about tropes and archetypes, and I guess and also syphilis. And I had a lot of fun talking about syphilis for several years. And I would like I would like to make a project.
Sound like fun.
I'd like to make a project just on syphilis, honestly. I have, in my great future plans, I'd like to make a project about the plague, and I'd like to do something about syphilis. And yeah, I don't know.
It could be like the trilogy. You have to come up with a third one, though. AIDS, I suppose, but AIDS has been talked about before. I feel like there hasn't been as many documentaries on syphilis.
Yeah, probably not. I don't know. I mean, the thing is about syphilis is it's very evocative, right? The visualization of it, and like people's noses falling off, and like the disgusting.
Oh.
It's a really it's a very visceral disease.
So many greats died of it, though.
Yeah, well, so there's that, but also the whole history of it, and everybody shifting the blame. And I didn't realize when I started the project, but I found it interesting because one of the things I wanted to address was this kind of femme fatale figure, and actually that kind of came out of syphilis, because then there was this idea that there was always this idea that women, when syphilis came along, that you got it from the women. It's not like it was passed from person to person. It was like women were these harpies who were seducing you and giving you this deadly disease. And that's kind of where this whole motif came from.
Yeah. It's similar, I suppose, to like when AIDS came along. Sounds strange to say that, let's put it like that, but they thought that men were the only people who were getting it, but actually everyone could get it.
Exactly.
I was going to say, have you read Foucault? What do you think of him, Michel Foucault? He wrote a lot about the discourse of sexuality, and
I have to confess, I read it all like years ago, and it's always on my to-do list to kind of go back to it. But I mean,
I feel like he's making it up. Can you believe, though, that like most of his writings made it into mainstream magazines in France at the time?
Really?
It was like something that was openly, it was like, it's unthinkable nowadays. I mean, maybe in France it's different, but back then it was like, it was in a mainstream magazine that Foucault was writing all of his stuff in.
Wow.
Not all of his stuff, but he was writing some stuff, and but I feel like he's making a lot of it up.
Well, sure, but that's that's academia. No, you have to make sure.
Yeah, big time. What do you think of the way people talk about sex nowadays in the mainstream?
I'm not really sure that I know how people talk about sex in the mainstream. I have to say, I think I live in my liberal bubble where people are pretty open.
How do they talk about it in how do they talk about it in the liberal bubble then?
I don't know. I think like fairly openly. But of course it depends on person to person. Like, some people are very reluctant to talk about it. Some people are very happy to share kind of experiences and impressions. I don't know. I mean, in the mainstream media.
It is, like you said, still a taboo topic.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's still bullshit. I'm sure there's still a lot of crap. I mean, there's always horrible things like this poor girl in Cyprus who got raped, and then for all this political bullshit, she's now, it's been turned against her, and now she's the one who's stuck in prison.
What?
Have you not heard about this story?
No.
Oh man. Well, I don't know how well I can speak about the details, but there was this girl who she was pretty young, I think like 18 or so, maybe even younger, and she was on holiday in Cyprus, and she was supposedly having consensual sex with this Israeli dude who was there. He's part of the Israeli army, and he was there with a bunch of his buddies, and then it changed from consensual sex with him to her being gang raped. And I don't know for sure, but supposedly there's even like phone footage of it. But because Cyprus wants to be on good terms with Israel for whatever reasons that I've completely forgotten what they are, there was a strong push not to convict these guys. So not only this poor young girl, she got harangued, and she got really harsh treatment when she was in the police station, and they forced her basically to say, after hours and hours of questioning, and they forced her to say that she made it up and it was a lie and that nobody raped her. And so then they turned it against her, and now she's the one being convicted for making false accusations, and she's stuck there, and the useless British government, of course, is doing nothing. But this was a couple of weeks ago. I don't know what the latest developments are, but the last thing I knew, was she was facing a prison term or something really insane.
Oh my God, it sounds crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about sex work then?
I'm in favor.
What's your take on that?
I'm in favor of decriminalization. That's, I guess, the long and short of it. I think think there should be a lot more efforts to destigmatize sex work and provide more protection for sex workers, and just change the way we always talk about them as if their lives are worth less than anyone else's, and that they somehow have less rights than anyone else.
Well, Zoe, we've well past the half-hour mark. We're actually
surprised.
Close to the 40 minutes. It's fascinating talking with you, actually. I'll be seeing you at One World.
Yes, you will.
Or at Estock platform.
You will.
How is Prague these days?
Colder than France, and so I resent it for that. But fine.
Yeah, you said that you want to live around the Mediterranean. Basically, that's what you were saying.
But it's the grass is always greener. If I'm there, then then it drives me crazy in reality.
That's why I keep moving, so that I don't have to think those unhealthy thoughts. But there must be something about Prague that you like, right?
Oh no, there's plenty of things I
love
like
this city.
about it. Yeah, sure. I mean,
apart from the cold, it still seems to be that so many of the like creative people that I know, or whom I know, seem to revolve around, seem to have lived in Prague at one point or another in their lives. And what is it about that city?
I don't know. I guess it's the center of the continent. I don't know if geography plays a part, but I think there is something about it that catches people's imagination. But it's also much more chill compared to a lot of other capital cities, I would say. So maybe it's something about this. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Zoe, thank you very much for doing this. This was it was great talking with you.
Likewise.
We should do this again sometime.
We should.
Yeah, I'd like to know more about the documentary that you're working on, that you were talking to me about. It sounds great.
Well, hopefully next time I'll have more progress to report.
All right. Thanks very much, Zoe.
All right. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.